All right, let's get this show on the road, shall we? Power rankings. Who needs them? You guys do, right? Okay. A lot of movement from the last couple of weeks. Some teams have got hot, some teams have got cold, and I made some adjustments around the All-Star break. And so yeah, a lot of movement, and yet near the top there's hardly any. No new teams in the top 8, we'll put it that way. Number 31, down 3 spots from last week, the Ottawa Senators. The Senators are back to looking like, well, the team that wore this logo back at the start of their existence that won 10 games out of 84. And it was an 84-game schedule that year. 10 wins, 4 ties, so total of 24 points. This year they got 43, but it feels kind of like 24 at times. And yeah, they're back down to the bottom of the heap. With many apologies to Ottawa fans. I am an Ottawa fan myself, but it is hard to justify having them any higher than 31st based on the last couple of weeks. Number 30, staying in the same spot. You know, the Anaheim Ducks look like they might be ready to turn around when they had a couple of wins in a row. Do you remember that? No. They've lost 15 out of 17 overall, and it's been ugly. And they're still in a race for a playoff spot, but they're racing in the wrong direction. They don't want anything to do with that playoff spot. Number 29, moving up 2 spots from last week, the Detroit Red Wings. So while we're talking about teams marching downward, let's talk about a team in Detroit that's actually performing pretty well. The Detroit Red Wings aren't winning a lot, but they're competitive. They did get the shutout win over these guys tonight, and they did beat Toronto. So they've had a couple of wins. They're usually competitive when they lose. They're at least entertaining, and you get the feeling with Detroit that next year they could really kind of turn things around. Just not this season. Number 28, moving down 3 spots, is LA. Now, the Kings had been playing relatively well until the trade of Muzzin. Relatively well meaning game up, game down kind of thing. But Jake Muzzin being gone, and then the result from LA's game tonight against the Islanders, I really think that any hope of a run towards the playoffs for the Kings should be extinguished, and yet because it's the West, it kind of sort of isn't. And so they're in the bottom row, but they're still mathematically in. So are the Ducks. Oh, the West. As I said in the review video tonight, I do need to do a video tomorrow on the Western playoff chase, where we're at, who's where, and who's going where. Are any of them playing tomorrow? Edmonton plays tomorrow. So Edmonton's place will be decided before I do that video tomorrow. I wouldn't want to do that before then. Number 27, dropping 1 spot from the week before, is Florida. Now, Reimer wins a big game tonight. And Florida has their moments. They don't have them often enough or consistently enough for me to bump them up. And they stay in this area because when you've won 21, I think they've won 21 out of 51. They're somewhere in that region. It's just it's not often enough that I can justify bumping them up. And yet, if you look at their forward group on paper, they have one of the better forward groups in the league. They really do, and yet it doesn't add up. At number 26, dropping a shocking, whopping, huge 10 spots, the Oilers. The Oilers, who are still mathematically in it, and yet all the Chiarelli crap and the just everything that's going on with the Oilers right now, they've lost 4 in a row, including the game today, and they just look lost. And, you know, they're close to a playoff spot, and yet the conversation is, could the Oilers actually make the playoffs? Because while they were in a playoff spot not that long ago, it feels like it was years ago. And for Oiler fans, it's been a bad turn of events, and it just doesn't look like they have it. At a time when there's some teams in the West that are kind of figuring it out, they don't look like they're one of those teams. They should have won that game today over Philly. Undisciplined game, and those four penalty power play goals against were just killer, and then they lose it in overtime. Now they're going to go into Montreal. It'll be very interesting to see how they respond tomorrow in Montreal. But for right now, I'm fine with having them there. Number 25, moving up 4 spots from last week, the Arizona, this says Phoenix, but Arizona Coyotes. Now, My concern with Arizona remains. They don't score often enough. This is not a team that gets enough goals for me to move them up beyond where they are. They're winning some games here and there, like tonight against San Jose. They had a very gutsy performance, but they lose it in overtime. So gutsy performance, they get the 1 point, their opponent gets the 2. They fall a point further behind the San Jose Sharks. And this is kind of what happens with Arizona. Good goaltending, good defense, special teams are solid, but the actual goal scoring for Arizona is a concern. It's an ongoing concern, and I don't see a whole lot of hope that they'll make the playoffs. But that being said, Vancouver's in the playoffs right now. Yeah, this is a weird year. Number 24, moving up 3 spots from where they were 2 weeks ago. I keep saying last week, but it was 2 weeks ago. You guys know what I mean. Are the Chicago Blackhawks. Now, the Hawks, they have their down games. They have their good games. When they're good, they look fantastic. They look like the Hawks of old. And when they're bad, they don't look anything like the Hawks of old when they're bad. So, for me, they're moving up because they've passed some teams. But how far up do they go? How realistic is the idea that they make the playoffs? I don't see it. And yet, again, because it's the West, who knows? It's just so messed up throughout the Western Conference that I don't really have a gauge on how likely it is that Chicago will make it. Number 23, staying in the same spot as 2 weeks ago, I should say, the New Jersey Devils. The Devils hanging around down here. They win a couple, they lose a couple, they win, they lose. They need to be a little more consistent if they're going to be anywhere near the playoff conversation, and they need to start being consistent about a month ago to be in the playoff conversation. It's nice to see them get a win today. It's nice to see Heischer's development going as well as it is. But again, I mentioned this in the review for those games. It'll be hollow comfort to some Devils fans as they get concerned that Taylor Hall's contract is up at the end of next season. And then the concern is he going to want to stay in Jersey? I think he will. I do. I think he'll end up wanting to stay in New Jersey. Number 22, dropping 1 spot from where they were 2 weeks ago, Vancouver. They jumped up tonight based on the win over Colorado, but I'm not doing backflips. I am not putting them in the top 16 just because they happen to be in a playoff spot in the West. I am well aware that Vancouver has some issues. With their blue line, there's some issues. Their goaltending's been solid. Their depth scoring has also been an issue. It showed up tonight against Colorado, but I'm tempering my excitement with Vancouver at this stage. They moved up this week from where I would have had them last week, but again, I didn't do the power rankings last week because only half the league was playing. So we'll see what happens in the upcoming week and how some of these rankings change. But for right now, Vancouver is in 22nd. 21st, dropping 3 spots from last week, is Buffalo. They just shoot themselves in the foot. They now find themselves 5 points back of a playoff spot and 2 points back of the Carolina Hurricanes, who are out of nowhere playing some of the best hockey in the East. For Buffalo, it's been a stark turnaround and in the wrong direction. And I don't know that they have the manpower to dig their way out. I understand what Jack Eichel is. I don't know that the supporting cast around him and Skinner is either ready in some of the young guys' cases or good enough in some of the rest of it. And I'm not sold on their blue line. Their goaltending tandem's okay. It's not a goaltending tandem that strikes fear into the hearts of the opposition, nor are they goaltenders who routinely go out and steal games like Gibson was for the Ducks early in the season. So for Buffalo, it's been a large fall for them. They were number 1 on the power rankings at one point. Those days are gone now, but not forgotten. Moving up 2 spots from where they were 2 weeks ago, St. Louis. Yep, the Blues cracked the top 20. And it has been a slow, gradual uptick for the St. Louis Blues. And I've seen some power rankings jumping on the Blues bandwagon early and quick. And some having them in the top 16 over the last month, where I've gone, I don't know that I'd have them in the top 16 yet, but I get it. I get it that if you look at it, on the surface of it, St. Louis looks like a value team that should be better than what they are. and they should be able to go on and run and make the playoffs. And they've had some very, very solid games. Even in some losses they've played well. St. Louis is gradually working their way up for me, but I want to see some more consistency. I don't want to see the one up, one down. So once we see some consistent winning with St. Louis, then I'll be sold. I would not be surprised if these guys claim the wild card spot and it ends up victimizing the Canucks at the end of the year. I'm not going to be that upset if that happens. Although Antoine Roussel for Vancouver said he's been talking to the guys and he told them he has finished a couple of points to 3 points out of the playoffs before as a member of the Dallas Stars and explained to them just how painful that is. He would know, having been a Dallas Star, how painful it is to barely miss the playoffs. So we'll see how that race turns out. But for right now, I have St. Louis in 20th. In 19th spot and down 4 spots from where they were 2 weeks ago, the Avs. And to be honest, the Avs, I could justify having them down around here and bumping everybody else up. It has been a steep decline for the Colorado Avalanche over the last couple of weeks. And that's after they had some encouraging results the week before that. And now they've gone right back into this funk they'd been in. And right now they're sitting outside a playoff spot. It's insane, but they're sitting outside of a playoff spot. The Colorado Avalanche, February 2nd, are sitting outside a playoff spot. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with them. I'm not sure which teams in the West are going to end up actually being the 2 wild cards. I am just as curious, befuddled as anybody else. Because it just feels like there aren't enough teams that are really pushing for it, and somebody's got to start pushing for it. Might as well be Vancouver, but again, we're early, and now they play, including tonight, 7 out of 9 on the road. So, Colorado, rough start at home, but their home record hasn't been very good this year either. That was a weird year. Last year, they were deadly at home. Number 18, moving up 1 spot from where they were 2 weeks ago, the New York Rangers. So the Rangers find themselves in the top 2 rows. Now, of course, what justifies being in the top 2 rows changes every week because I tend to change the magnets every week. I will say this set of magnets I like quite a bit, and I'm leaning towards just keeping these for the rest of the season. I just got these, and I just made the magnets this past week. So there you go. The New York Rangers, though, have played well. It'll be interesting to see because they are likely going to sell what their roster looks like after they do the selling and what it does to their results. Remember, last year at this time, they looked relatively decent, and then they sold at the deadline, and they fell right off a cliff. That could happen again this year. It's frustrating when you see that happen, but for Ranger fans, they understand that the pain that they're experiencing now is for that long-term gain, something that the New York Rangers have needed to embrace, and they finally are. So we'll see how it turns out for them. Right now, though, they have moved up because they've had some good results and some losses, and they've had their share of wins, too. Number 17, moving up 7 spots from where they were 2 weeks ago. There you go, Flyer fans. It works. The Flyers started winning, and I was not quick to say, all right, so they're for real. Here we go. Jump them up the board. But 7 wins in a row will cause them to jump up the board. That's just the way it works. The Flyers still have those same concerns they've had the whole way through. The difference is Carter Hart's playing fantastic. And if Stolarz can prove that it's not just one game, that he can consistently be a good backup, they finally have a tandem in Philly you can count on night in and night out. And that could bump them right back into a playoff spot. It's going to be tough because there's not a whole lot of games left for them to make up the kind of ground that they have to make up. And they have to pass some teams in front of them before they can get up to a playoff spot. And the math doesn't look good for Philly, but winning 7 in a row makes it a lot better than the way it looked not that long ago, like before the 7-game winning streak. So for Philly, I have them at 17. And we'll see where they end up. Number 16, dropping 5 spots from last week. Or 2 weeks ago, I should say. Boston. There's a malaise that's fallen over Boston. There's a lack of scoring depth that's hit Boston. And, they were buoyed early on by Halak's goaltending. That first line with Bergeron being on fire. It hasn't been as solid lately. Now, Pasternak's still getting all the points. Bergeron slowed down as I expected he would. He's not a 100-point guy. That's not his game. Marchand is kind of, point a game, pretty good numbers, but because they've fallen back to human levels, except Pasternak, who's godly. The fact that they don't have a lot of scoring behind them has become more and more apparent. And the fact that they've scored the first goal 6 times, and in those 6 times, they've won 1 game, it shows that they're having some real problems. They can't hold the lead if they get the lead, and you don't go very far in the playoffs if your team doesn't hold the lead. Number 15, also dropping 5 spots, also having a lot of problems, having lost 5 in a row, is Columbus. It's looking ugly for Columbus. This time next week, I could see them being down in around the 19 area. If St. Louis wins some, Philly keeps it going. If Boston can turn things around, and the Rangers manage to stay decent, because Columbus, it's starting to look kind of ugly. And again, you know, you ask yourself, how long can a coach go through this? And there's been some kind of not hidden feuds between himself and Bobrovsky. Duclair's been, you know, under the gun with him, and other players over the last couple of years that he seems to have had problems with. How long can you do this before the team has a complete change of who's in the lineup, a complete overhaul, or you just change the coach? And Jarmo Kekalainen isn't at that point yet, but he's not that far off. Number 14, dropping 2 spots from where they were last week, and this would have been worse. Capitals. The Capitals would have been far lower than 14th had they lost that game at home against Calgary. It appears that the break helped them. And so for Washington, they may very well be able to turn this ship around. They have the game tomorrow against Boston. That usually helps. And Boston can't hold the lead. So you're welcome, Washington. Your struggling days could be over thanks to the Boston Bruins. But all kidding aside, I still expect Washington to turn things around and finish with a pretty decent shot at a top 3 spot in their division, if not a division title. But they're not there yet, and that division leader in the Metro, they're playing pretty well. They've had a pretty good run. Number 13, staying in the same spot as last week, 2 weeks ago. Wild. Yeah. So Minnesota staying 13th. They would have moved up, but they lost to Chicago, and they end up right back where they were 2 weeks ago. Same concerns with Minnesota. Goaltending's good. I worry about some players getting tired as the season rolls along. I worry about depth. There's certain things with Minnesota I worry about. And the other thing is, if they get into the playoffs, are they just going to be out in the first round again? Because that's not going to feel good for Minnesota fans if this team makes the playoffs and then they're just out in 5 or 6 in the first round again. That's not, and if they're swept in the first round, they're probably going to feel worse. Number 12, moving up 8 spots from where they were 2 weeks ago, Dallas. Over this 4-game winning streak, Dallas has started to look like they want to make the playoffs. Dallas in a playoff spot right now. They're 3rd in the division. They're within, it's a loud shout, but they're within a loud shouting distance of Nashville. It's 8 points. But Dallas is in it. And their goaltending has been fantastic. A big reason for this jump has been their goaltending. But Tyler Seguin finally seems to be putting it together. Seguin has started scoring again. And if Tyler Seguin can continue to play the way he's played over the last couple of weeks, Dallas is in the playoffs. That's it. And the other variable with Dallas that I worry about is, of course, their depth scoring. That's always going to be an issue with Dallas. I'm going to mention it every week because it's an issue. So it's worth mentioning, as much as I know Dallas fans might think I'm harping on it. It's just out there. Number 11, dropping 5 spots from last week. What happened? What has happened to the Vegas Golden Knights? Their road record finally was decent, and now they've started struggling on the road again. They lost to Carolina. They lost to Florida. And it's not shameful to lose to Carolina these days, but it's a game that Vegas, being as solid as Vegas has been for the last few months, should be able to win. But their record has started to become kind of mediocre again. The one thing about Vegas is there's not really enough time left in the season for them to potentially drop out of the playoffs. But if they don't have home ice in that first round, I don't give them a great chance of getting out of that first round. We haven't got to that point, of course. The playoffs are still 2 months away, but they're only 2 months away. We are not we're not entirely that far from the playoffs, so Vegas really has to turn things around. And for George McPhee, what he's seen in both Florida and Carolina has to show him this team is not close right now. Something needs to be changed. Something needs to be fixed. And this isn't just a, well, once Howla gets back, this is more than that. There's something else going on here with Vegas. Number 10, moving up 4 spots from where they were 2 weeks ago, is Nashville. Yes, the Nashville Predators are back in the top 10. And they would have been higher if not for the loss against the Dallas Stars tonight. So Nashville has played relatively well enough that they've passed some teams, and we'll see if they're able to maintain it. Because again, lost 5 in a row, having trouble staying consistent, and in the case of Vegas, they've lost some in a row, and Boston's lost 2. So as much as people might look at Nashville and say, well, I haven't been playing that well. True, but they haven't been as bad. I'm not going to say Dallas. Dallas has moved up. They haven't been playing as poorly as some of the other teams. So they move up based on that. Number 9. Moving up 8 spots from where they were. 8 spots. And you know, I looked at it. I looked at this board today and I said, Carolina's in the top 10? Then Nashville lost against Dallas. Carolina's not in the top 10. They're in the top row. They're top 9. So with that loss by Nashville, they dropped down to 10. And Carolina went up to 9. And welcome to the top row, Carolina. And I don't know how long this lasts. But Carolina had one of the better records in January. They've now started off February like they ended January. They look solid. Aho looks like a star player. Teravainen, since signing that extension, has been great. Their blue line is fantastic. Their goaltending's been solid. Peter Mrazek is playing some of the best hockey he's played in years. So there are a lot of things to like about Carolina right now. And again, and I mentioned like a month and a half ago, I'm like, I'm never going to believe in Carolina going to the playoffs again. Never, ever, ever. And then they do this. So are they going to make the playoffs? I don't want to say yes because they've hurt my feelings before, and I don't like it when a team hurts my feelings. But they're kind of making me believe in them, which is really aggravating. Number 8. Staying in the same spot where they were 2 weeks ago. Toronto. When you lose to Detroit and then you beat Pittsburgh, I don't know. It's hard to get an idea of exactly where Toronto fits into this. I do like the fact that Matthews has started scoring again. I like the fact that Toronto does have a number of offensive weapons so that even when they're struggling at points in time, there are different guys who will get going. So if Tavares is cold, Matthews is going. Matthews cools off. Kadri will score some. There's a lot of weapons in this lineup. I don't think Kyle Dubas is done. I don't think the Jake Muzzin addition fixes a lot of things. I think it helps. But I think that I think there's more moves to be made. And I think he's going to be making them over the next week or so. And I think there's probably some surprises to be found there. Number 7. Moving up 2 spots from where they were last week. 2 weeks ago, I should say. Montreal. Based on, largely on Carey Price is finally looking like Carey Price. They're getting timely goal scoring, and their defense, while it's not stellar, it's not fantastic, it's been a heck of a lot better since Shea Weber came back, and there's a lot to like there. Montreal moves up to 7th. I still have some scoring concern with them. I do have some concern about how long Carey Price can play at this level before things regress. It's just one of those things where I've seen him regress often enough over the last few years that I feel like, okay, it's going to happen, just when. And I know that may sound unreasonable, but it's just sort of how I've been conditioned to think of things. Number 6, moving up 1 spot from where they were 2 weeks ago. The very unpredictable Penguins. One night, the Pittsburgh Penguins look like they are Stanley Cup contenders. And they're ready and they're good. Sidney Crosby, best hockey he's ever played. Depending on the article you read right now, Sidney Crosby's playing the best hockey he's ever played in his entire career. This is the best Sid the Kid's ever looked. I don't think so, but I get why they feel that way. The excitement over Sidney Crosby, who's old by the NHL standards right now, playing so well in a league dominated by kids 24 or under. It's a good story. And the Penguins are a good story. And Matt Murray's been very up and down. DeSmith's been the better of the two goalies. But I get why they want Matt Murray to get on a hot streak, because Murray has shown before he should be the starter. Between him and DeSmith, he should be the starter. And they're waiting for that to really kick in with him. Number 5, dropping 2 spots from where they were 2 weeks ago. The Sharks. Not dropping because they're not playing well. They dropped because somebody passed them. And that happens. The Sharks are contenders. Erik Karlsson, I think, wants to stay there. And I think they'd like to keep him. Whether or not they can afford to keep him. Whether or not they're going to meet his contract demand could be something completely different. And if they don't meet his contract demand, do you keep him through the deadline or do you risk trading him? That's the big $1 million question, or it could be a $10 or $11 million question, right? Right. So for the Sharks, I have them at 5th, playing pretty solid. At least Jones came out tonight and played well. I do have concerns about their goaltending, but tonight it looked solid against Arizona, who, as I've mentioned with them, they have trouble scoring, so I don't know. Number 4, and in the same spot that they were 2 weeks ago, Winnipeg. The Jets, it's been a pretty solid run for the Jets. They're a very good team, first in their division, and they're starting to look like maybe they're ready to start pulling away and get that lead to a nice, I'm not going to say double digit yet, but they could get there. And if they can win the division by a lot, have that kind of confidence going to the playoffs, who knows where that takes the Winnipeg Jets in the playoffs. But all I know is that if you have home ice, you have a much better chance of winning historically in the NHL. And it looks like the Jets are going to be in the running for that number 1 spot in the entire Western Conference, which is where we kind of had them pegged. We just thought they'd be fighting more with Nashville and not as much with Calgary. Number 3, moving up 2 spots from where they were last week, because the Islanders are starting to look like they're for real. And it's funny because, I'm watching the Islander announcers tonight, and you can see them saying, well, it looks like they're going to make the playoffs. Like, they're having a hard time wrapping their brain around the idea that they could actually get to the playoffs this year. It's like they're waking up, they're looking at the standings, they went to sleep in September, and they're looking and going, is this from 1980? Oh, no, it wouldn't be from the 1980s, because look at the other teams in that division. You sure? Because this looks... Did Pat LaFontaine take a youth drug and he's out there? Do we have Billy Smith? And what is going... What is with... Are those the real goaltending stats? Like, it has been a complete and total turnaround for the New York Islanders and for this year's Coach of the Year, Barry Trotz. And it's been an inspiring story. Number 2 and number 1, this is where it gets difficult, right? So it's the same number 2 and number 1 as it has been for a while. And really, honestly, it comes down to this. The Flames lost when they went into Washington. The Lightning won both their games against the Islanders in a scoreless game that went to a shootout and then beat the Rangers. I give Tampa Bay the slightest of edges back into number 1 spot on the power rankings. Tampa's back. And for Calgary, they'll be back again. It'll happen for them. So... all right, I'm going to do it this way. All right, now what I've done, with the new algorithm, the Ducks end up finishing first because I weighted the losses. See, with 15 and 17, that's too many. So you have to kind of weight them, and you have to look at a loss like tonight's against Winnipeg, and you have to say, but what did they really lose? So I put them at first. I have the Arizona Coyotes in second, because the belief is that the Kachina will become their jersey, which will influence their record. So this is more of a future cast thing with their record. Boston is in third, because I feel bad for everything that's gone on with the entire the whole thing with Red Kelly not being a Bruin. I don't think that's right. Like, he had his jersey retired by Detroit and Toronto, and I'm like, why wasn't it retired by Boston? And they said he didn't play for Boston, so for that reason, I've moved them up number 3. Buffalo is at 4, for the reasons that they came into the league in 1970. 1970 was very important, which is why Vancouver's at 8th. I felt that I really needed to highlight where we went with that expansion. Winnipeg is 5th because by reverse alphabetical, it looked like they beat the Ducks 9-3. But if you look at the beyond stats, which are more than advanced is advanced and beyond is beyond. The beyond stats, they're better, which is why the Caps are 6th despite the fact they've lost 7 out of 8. Because again, if you overweigh the losses, which is what we've been doing with Washington and with Anaheim, we overweigh the losses. You take that weight off, you bring them up, they move up, they get near the top. Vegas, much the same thing, where you have to de-weight, you take the weight off of the losses they took on the road, you see between the goals, you look at the beyond, and you find something different. So for that reason, I put them there. Ottawa, I've got as high as 9th, because you know what? The bravery this team has, knowing they don't have their own first-round draft pick, and yet they're willing to risk it being number 1, that's true bravery. And for that reason, they're top 10. Thank you guys so much for watching, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. These power rankings, they're as close to accurate as you're going to get from me this week, right now. I'll talk to you again soon.